Good day, everyone. I am Miss May Altamia, and I am the reporter number 35. So, my topic is to compare the magnitude of sought quantities as frictional force, normal force, threshold angles for sliding, and acceleration. So let us first define sought quantities. So it is generally refers to the specific values or amounts that are being investigated or determined in a problem or analysis. In mathematics, science, or engineering, these are the unknown variables or outcomes that you're trying to find or calculate based on the given information or conditions. So, what is frictional force? Frictional force refers to the force generated by two surfaces that contact and slide against each other. These forces are mainly affected by the surface texture and quantity of force requiring them together. The angle and position of the object affects the volume of frictional force. So as you can see sa picture, diba? So, frictional force is the force that opposes the motion of an object sliding or attempting to slide across the surface. There are few factors affecting the frictional force. These forces are mainly affected by the surface texture and the amount of force impelling them together. The angle and position of the object affect the amount of frictional force. If an object is placed flat against the object, then the frictional force will be equal to the object's weight. If an object is pushed against the surface, then the frictional force will be increased and becomes more than the weight of the object. Calculating the force of friction. The maximum amount of friction force that a surface can apply upon an object can be easily calculated with the use of the given formula. So F friction is equal to mu times F normal friction. So to help us calculate the frictional force, here are the methodical steps to follow while calculating the force of friction. So first is we need to find the normal force. The normal force is the support force exerted upon an object that is in contact with another stable object. The normal force can be simply described in most cases by the following formula, which is the N equals mg. So in this formula, m describes the object's mass and g stands for the acceleration due to the gravity. In the case of an inclined surface, the strength of the normal surface is reduced the more the surface is inclined. Hence, the formula becomes N equals mg cosine theta. Theta represents the angle to the surface is inclined to. In a simple calculation, we would calculate the normal force of a 2 kg block of wood sitting on a surface as N equals 2 kg times 9.8 is equal to 19.6 N. Then finding the right coefficient. The coefficient you choose depends on the object and the specific situation. If the object is not moving across the surface, you use the coefficient of static friction. But if the object under consideration is moving, you use the coefficient of sliding friction. The type of materials to used of also affects the coefficient. For example, if a block was on a brick surface, the coefficient would be 0.6. But if it were on a block of clean wood, it would range from 0.25 to 0.5. Then lastly is we need to calculate the frictional force. So as we discussed, the formula for frictional force is given by F equals mu n. As an example, let us consider the block of wood that weighs 2 kg resting on a table to be pushed from rest. In this case, we consider the static friction coefficient. 0.5 is the static coefficient of wood. So, andyan sa picture. So with the given details, we can calculate the normal force as N is equal to 2 kg times 9.8. Then, kapag i-compute natin, so ang sagot is N or kilograms is equal to 19.6 N. Now that we have the values of normal force and static friction coefficient, we can calculate the frictional force as follows. So, ang sunod is ang normal force. So, the normal force is defined as the force that a surface employs on any other body. If that body is at rest, it means that the net force acting on the body is equals to 0. This means that the downward force, that is, the weight, must be similar to the upward force, which is the normal force. The normal force is a force that is felt every day. For example, when we place a book on a table, the typical reaction force resists the book from falling through the table, right? The strength of gravity is drawing the book downward, but the book isn't falling. That means there exists some force which must be pushing it up. That force is termed the normal force. So yun na yung normal force. So the word normal here means perpendicular to the surface. So now let's proceed to its formulas. So formula number 1 is Fn is equals to F sine theta plus mg. Theta is the angle with which the body falls. Fn is the normal force. M represents the mass of the body, and g represents the force of gravity. The formula number 2 is Fn equals mg minus F sine theta. Theta represents the angle with which body moves up. Fn is the normal force, m the mass, and g is the force of the gravity. Tapos, yung formula number 3 naman is Fn equals mg. G is the force of gravity, N is the mass. And then, yung last is the formula number 4, Fn equals mg cosine theta. Theta is the angle of the inclined surface, normal force, yung Fn, m, the mass of the body, and g is the force of the gravity. So, I have here some real-life examples for the normal force. So, first is a girl standing on a flat surface. The girl in the picture is standing perpendicular on the flat surface. Hence, a perpendicular force acts on the girl. This force will now be termed a normal force as it is acting perpendicularly to the girl. Then, the second one is television resting on a table. When a television rests on a table, a perpendicular force exists on television. As this force is acting perpendicularly to the surface of television, this force will be none other than a normal force, of course. So, from these examples, it is clear that when a force acts in a perpendicular direction, it will be termed a normal force. Let us now proceed to threshold angles for sliding. The threshold angle for sliding is also known as the angle of repose. It is the critical angle of an inclined surface at which an object just begins to slide or move. It is the angle where the component of gravitational force parallel to the incline equals the maximum static friction force that resists sliding. This is the angle at which an object on an inclined surface begins to slide. Sabi ko nga kanina, diba? It represents the limit at which the force of gravity overcomes as the frictional force. And lastly, we have acceleration. Acceleration is the rate at which velocity changes with time in terms of both speed and direction. A point or an object moving in a straight line is accelerated if it speeds up or slows down. So, yun nga. So, yung acceleration daw is ang rate kung saan ang object ng velocity ay nagbabago over time. It can be influenced by the net force acting on the object and its mass. Now, let's compare these quantities. Frictional force versus normal force. Frictional force is directly proportional to the normal force. As the normal force increases, the frictional force also increases. For example, if you push a book harder into the table, the frictional force will increase. Number 2. Threshold angle for sliding. The threshold angle is dependent on the coefficient of friction between the two surfaces. A higher coefficient means a higher threshold. For example, rubber on concrete has a higher threshold angle compared to metal on ice. Number 3. The acceleration. It is influenced by the net force acting on an object and its mass. According to Newton's second law, acceleration is the result of the net force divided by the mass of the object. For instance, a heavier object requires more force to achieve the same acceleration as a lighter one.